The lower control arm has a pocket developed in it to hold the spring. It's flat. This particular setup here contains a 15-inch spring, so there's a lot of stored energy for drag racing and a lot of travel. That way that you can adjust the front end height that you want and still have plenty of travel with that spring. The upper control arm is a nice piece, and it's available in two combinations, either 8 to 10 degree caster or a smaller amount of caster for somebody that might not be racing.
And can I ask you what this thing here is for?
That's just an adjustment to limit the travel on the car. This particular front end will have about 5 to 5.5 inches of travel, which is an extreme amount of travel. But if you are a drag racer and you have a small tire on your car, you need at least 5 inches of travel to make the chassis work, especially on a bolt-on leaf spring traction device. So that's what's really great about this front end. There's plenty of travel, and you can limit the amount of travel if the track is real good down to almost zero. So it just about does everything. It's very, very tunable.
What about control arm options now?
The car has a tendency to have a little bit of a dragster look on the front end with the 8 to 10 degrees worth of caster. Probably somebody would, if they were only going to drive it on the street, would want something with less caster.
Less caster.
Absolutely.
What about those springs, guys? I mean, that looks like it's in the stock location also.
Yes, this whole front end actually mimics the stock location of the stock frame. I forgot to point out a second ago, the adjustments are just like any stock front end, just about shimming to get exactly the way you want it. That spring is a really nice piece. We've selected a 200-pound spring. It's an epoxy coated spring. It's the correct wire diameter for generally most applications. If you find your car a little bit too high, of course you could cut a small portion of the coil off. And that's what's great about this bottom spring pocket, that this spring can actually go anywhere. It doesn't have to have any exact location, so you can get the exact ride height that you desire for your car.
It also gives you the opportunity to put any type of shock in between that spring.
Absolutely. A double adjustable shock is what we're using currently right now, and the length of shock that we have works with that spring.
What is the other application Nick was bringing up earlier in the program about the strut style front end that this comes with also?
Yes, you can have an option. This is of course shown as a stock coil that you'd have on any conventional stock car, but you can use the later coil-over shock on this as well, and that would come with a different lower control arm. It's optional. We found for drag racing this works the best, but some guys like the look and the feel of the coil-over shock.
You know, one of the biggest things when I look at this piece is what one will gain in header clearance.
Oh, that's just tremendous.
I even said that one will change his vocabulary from a stock style car when they're changing the plugs.
And your tools will stay on your car when you're working on it.
Yeah, you won't be swearing about header bolts. The header clearance is absolutely phenomenal. You can look down into this and imagine that this is all header clearance. The tubes come out almost like a pro stocker. All the plugs are easily accessible. Headers are almost fun to put on. I believe one side even drops down from the top.
Did you say that headers are fun to put on?
Yeah, they're fun to
I
put
can't
on.
believe that.
Well, I guess we're about to find out.
John, I also noticed that they've done something with the rack down here. Can you explain that?
Sure, Nick. One of the things that's very, very important in a front end like this is to get the rack position correctly. And because of that, we use a pinot style rack, but we do have to lengthen it and change some things in the internals. So this rack is actually a custom piece for this front end.
It's not something that you just buy out of a magazine then?
No, not at all. There was a lot of time and development spent in positioning of this rack, lengthening it, getting it correct. And although this car, particular front end, is not void of all bump steer, it probably limits it to, I don't know the exact figure right now, but the last thing I heard, over 5 inches of travel, maybe a ½ inch, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah, that is incredible, especially on this frame.
Because it still retains the stock front end, the same positions of the A-arms, and that's what's the limiting factor here. But I've driven it in my car, it's awesome.
Absolutely. I mean, this thing's just incredible. You can also go out, you know, Kim Smith, who has a long reputation for building pro stock style cars and trucks, you can see it all right here in this bolt-on subframe. I mean, he's used a lot of pro stock technology for the guy at home that wants to do it, whether it be his race car or his street car. You know, there's a great shot of the engine plate that you were talking about. You know, with the rear one not here, but we can see the front engine plate here. Explain a little bit about what this will do for your application.
Well, this application is pretty trick, I thought. You can remove this block here. If you ever want to put a small block, big block, it doesn't matter. You can remove this for the small block or put it back in for the big block.
Does
You're
that
not stationed for one motor application only.
Is that with the thickness? I mean, is that what you're talking about?
Yes, the
Push
motor, yes, the small block, big block, it doesn't matter.
So that's a pretty trick piece to have available. So whether you want to, you can change whether you got a big block now and you want to run a small block later, all you got to do is go to Kim Smith and buy these brackets.
Sure can. As you can see in our application, we've already had the brake lines fabricated and put on at Kim Smith's shop. In your application, you may use your stock brake lines to re-hook into your factory master cylinder. Another advantage of this front end is how light this front end is. Try and do this at home. Control arms and all.
Incredible. That's where the 150 pounds comes in with the weight loss, just by bolting this front end on versus the stock application.
Exactly. Now let's go install this thing.
Well, John, what's the first step to installing this tubular front end on the Chevrolet Nova?
Well, it looks like this Nova's got to have the hood taken off. So let's take that hood off, huh, Nick?
There we go.
Let's go.
Wow, you can see that the engine and transmission in our application has already been removed, John.
You guys have done a good job. Hood bolts off here, which is kind of a no-brainer thing. And we're ready.
John and Nick, now that the hood's off, you can look in and see the stock location of this subframe. And now explain to us a little bit, after showing us the new piece from Smith Racecraft, some of the advantage points to putting it in versus the stock one.
Well, here we go. Nick, take a look at that. We've looked at that for years, haven't we?
Oh yeah, we have.
Big square tube, very bulky, heavy frame. Nick's pointing out the K member there. As you can see, it's just full of different things to turn the car. We have a typical worm and ball steering box. We have a drag link down there, ball joints, all kinds of linkage to get this car steered.
Is this where a lot of the weight factor comes in, John?
Absolutely, all this stuff will disappear, as you can see on the other frame. The K member is a big issue on these cars. They tend to sag after a number of years.
When you say sag, what do you mean? I mean, does it actually weaken up?
Through the years and years of bouncing them down over these cars that are now 30 plus years old, the K member has a tendency to sag and weaken, and of course that affects the steering geometry and the front end alignment.
Awesome deal. You can see that the firewall has gone through some work at Tucci Performance also. Let's take a look. Nick, show us a little bit on the firewall.
Well, as you can see, I've removed the firewall here and pushed it back about an inch, inch and a half.
Distributor clearance?
Definitely, especially you guys with HEI still. This is something that you might want to do. I've also raised the tunnel quite a bit down in the bottom so you can get up there. If you have to run a scatter shield, you can do that.
Does that also help change the transmission bolts? I know that could be like 6 extensions on a ratchet long to get at that.
Definitely. And I also cut away on the floor a little bit down on the passenger side over there. If you look, you guys that have taken transmissions out of Novas, Camaros, you know that the lines are very hard to get off. Now,
Well, John will know. He respects street cars, and I noticed him looking at the heater box, knowing that this is going to be a street car with that Racecraft application in it.
You know, I noticed the heater box, the inlet and outlet are moved way to the outside. Obviously, this is going to be a big block.
There you go. One of the biggest and baddest in the land. Now let's go to the next step, removing this front end.
Removing this front end, let's get after it.
after removing the hood, we've come back here and jacked the car up, put jack stands underneath the rear end, making sure that it's secure and not moving, and then we'll move forward to jack the front of the car up. Now that we've jacked the front end up, we're going to put the jack stands underneath here, but they're going to go on the rocker panel, not on the frame. Let's lower the jack.
Well, John, now that we have the car securely in the air and leaving the jack under here for safety reasons, what do we do next?
Well, really, it's quite simple. We have a steering connection, we have a bumper connection, and we have 6 body mounts. And of course, if your brakes are connected, you want to disconnect those. In this case, we've already done that. Leave the tires, brakes on, everything. That's basically it.
Hey, Nick, let's get some bumper bolts and get some ratchets. Let's get this thing apart.
All right. We'll have this front end out of here in 15, 20 minutes.
Well, John, Nick's getting the bumper off. This is a pretty neat, cool project. I mean, it doesn't take many guys to get involved.
No, you and 2 of your buddies, and you have this front end out in about 30 minutes.
Nick's got a ratchet there with a 3/4 inch, I believe, and a
Yep.
wrench.
Okay, it's a bumper off.
Bumper's
Are we ready
off.
to go, Al?